We are going to hear the Half Moon Bay Volunteer Fire Department talk about their history, and part of that history includes this very building. They had their first public meeting in 1899 in this very building. So that's pretty cool. So welcome everyone, and I am going to introduce our speaker, Clayton Jolley. Clayton is the retired battalion chief of Coastside Fire, CAL FIRE.
Thank you, Ellen. Good evening, everybody. We're happy to be here with some of our volunteer firefighters. As Ellen said, I started out as a volunteer in 1974, but it wasn't on the coast side. It was in Independence in the Owens Valley, on the eastern part of California. Really needed there as well. But I came to the coast side in 1998 and immediately started working with these guys who were here at the time. They were here at the time. I'll leave it to that. And I'm doing Lions International stuff. I retired in 2013, which seems like yesterday, but God, it was almost 11 years ago now. 10 and a half years. When did that happen? Yeah. And I am the first vice district governor for the Lions district that includes San Mateo and San Francisco counties in the city of Palo Alto. Past president of the Half Moon Bay Lions Club, which I think there's one slide in here that may have something to do with the Lions Club, but it does tie in, I promise. I want to introduce our three members of the Half Moon Bay Volunteer Fire Department here. If you guys would stand up, I will start with the youngest member, Greg Hosfeld. Greg, when did you start out as a volunteer? So, yeah, 9 years. So Greg's a captain on the volunteer fire department. The next, I won't say the next youngest, but the next lowest in rank is a gentleman named Neil Soloway, who joined the Half Moon Bay Volunteer Fire Department in 1974. So, and you've been a volunteer for 50 years, right? Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Does that mean we gotta have a party?
Well, that's up to you. So the gentleman just speaking is Roger Pimentel, who's a volunteer fire chief and has been for 10 years now? Something like that. And Roger joined the volunteer fire department in
June of remember those numbers? 1976.
Oh, so Neil actually has seniority on you. Okay. Do you want to do any kind of quick introduction of yourself and your years in the fire service?
Just briefly, started as a guy coming off the street. A friend of mine says, hey, there's this volunteer fire department there in Half Moon Bay, and I think you'd fit in really well if you get involved in that and stuff. And I go, oh man, that's all I need is something else to do. And I said, no, okay. So went to a couple meetings, kind of fit in, and been there ever since. We got started as a firefighter, as a rookie, going through all the training and all those kinds of things, and then started to move up where you get your firefighter one, move into an apparatus operator, got promoted again to lieutenant. Then some years down the road, became a captain, and then some years down the road, somebody voted me in as the chief, so here I am.
Thank you, Roger. Okay, so we'll get started with our presentation, and if anything pops up from one of you guys, stick your hand up, and if you have something to say about one of the pictures that I haven't said, or if somebody in the audience has a question, please just go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll try to answer. We have a lot of years of information here. So we'll do our best to answer any questions. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, hose company number 1 was organized to provide fire protection in Half Moon Bay in 1899 in this very building, and met for many years in this building because there was no firehouse in Half Moon Bay per se till a few years later. This is a great picture. This is hose company number 1 in July 4th of 1901. We don't know where this picture was taken. We don't know who anybody is in this picture. If you recognize somebody, please let us know. There's nothing on the back of this photo. There's no names, there's no location, there's nothing. But what a beautiful photo from 125 years ago. 22. You can tell they had a lot of pride in that volunteer fire department. They invested time and money in it. They bought an apparatus, they bought uniforms, and they were very serious about what they were doing. Because in those days, of course, that's all you had. That was it. So the initial contributing members, and I think these people gave large sums of money. And there's a list down at the firehouse, and I think it says $5. But for $5, and you may remember some of these names, or somebody may be related to some of these people. You'll recognize some of the names. F.B. Fillmore, George Wyman, Charles Borden. I know somebody here whose business is in the old Borden barn on Prisma Street. Joseph De Benedetti. Right down the road is the De Benedetti building. Sorry to say that 3 times fast. Charter members, George Williams, Anton Joseph, J.M. Francis, J.V. Azevedo, A.S. Hatch. There's a name we all know. Yes. Excellent. So all of the wood in this room came from Hatch's Woods, which is up on the end of Prisma Creek Road and is now the Prisma Canyon Redwoods. The entire building, yeah. Thank you. Thomas Quinlan, F.J. Williams, Fred Simmons, and John De Benedetti. Very historical names in Half Moon Bay. The volunteers still have a paper subscription list which names those people and more, including the Levy brothers, which I think was at the general store, Frank Marsh, W.A. Simmons, Betancourt, Hatch, again, Gilchrist, who I think, was he the doctor? He was the pharmacist. Well, that was probably closest thing. Was there a doctor back then? Okay. C.H. Knapp, everybody knows the Knapp name, right? Knapp did the plow, the Side Hill plow.
I think I read somewhere too that he piped water down from a reservoir to make the first fire hydrants on Main Street. That's in a little book on him.
Yeah, that's fantastic information. And thank God he did that, because most of the town's still here. Charles Borden, again, from the Borden Barn. And guess what? The Ocean View Lodge, which we are standing in right now, 1901. This is a terrible picture. But that's a handwritten roster from 1902. It's still down at the fire station. They wouldn't let me bring it tonight.
Is that in one of the display cases in the lobby?
I think that this one is in the lobby display case. And unfortunately, I think they laminated it back in the 60s. First elected officers, the foreman, which would today be the chief, was W.A. Simmons. First assistant foreman, Anton Joseph. Second assistant foreman, John De Benedetti. The secretary was George Williams, and the treasurer was Joseph De Benedetti. This is also something that's in a display case down in the lobby of Station 40, south end of Main Street. As far as we know, the badge on the lower right is the oldest original badge from 19-aught something. The one on the left was a chief's badge from, we believe, the 30s. The one on the above top left was a cap badge that we think was in the 40s. And the one on the top right was an actual shirt badge that may have been in the 50s. None of these have dates stamped on the back, unfortunately. The top right's an old lieutenant's badge. Yeah, so typically in the fire service, if you were a lieutenant, your badge would have one bugle on it. So you can see that has a bugle on both sides, just one. But it also has a fire engine in the middle. Typically, if you are an engineer on a fire apparatus, you would have a fire engine in the middle. So that one's a little bit muddled, if you will, but often engineers are lieutenants. So one of the interesting facts about the volunteers is they had a fundraiser. They did their first one in 1900, shortly after they organized, and it was a masquerade ball. This dance continued for 100 years until the year 2000. And the reason it stopped, one of the reasons it stopped, one is it became more lightly attended, and the other is that during the Pumpkin Festival, they used to set up all the tents and everything on Main Street, and then the fire department made them take them down, and then set them up again the next morning, so that they could have access in case one of the buildings caught fire. You can imagine how difficult access would be if you couldn't drive down the street and one of the buildings had a problem. So there was an agreement that they could leave in 2000, they could leave the tents up. And they moved them from the sidewalk area. They used to be running up and down both sidewalks with a big clear area in the middle. And they moved them and they put them in the middle of the road. And we put gaps in them at all the fire hydrants. And they're cheated to the west side so that there's 20 feet down the entire east side of Main Street when the Pumpkin Festival booths are there. So you can drive a fire engine down there and you can access everything. So that worked really great. Pumpkin Festival loved it, but they could no longer have a masquerade dance on that weekend. So now what they do is they have a salmon and crab fundraiser, salmon and crab feed, which is fabulous, let me tell you. And is usually sold out. And the next one is on April 6th this year. So it's coming up, something to enjoy.
One other little thing on that, Chief. Well, you might, I don't know. So the first masquerade ball that they put on, the masquerade started and this and that. So they decided what they were going to do is to charge the men $1 to come in to the dance, and the ladies were free.
So if everybody heard that, they were pretty smart with the first masquerade balls. They charged all the guys $1 to come into the masquerade ball, but all the women were free.
And they made over $100.
And I don't have any firsthand knowledge, but I've heard a lot of stories about that particular event and how many police officers they needed to take care of the rowdy crowds in the later years. In 1900, they needed a way to let everybody know there was an issue. So they bought a fire bell for $80. That was a lot of money in 1900, $80. And they hung it on top of the hose tower on Kelly Avenue, opposite the present Half Moon Bay Review building. So right about where they're building that new building on the corner where the old gas station was, it was kind of just slightly east of there. In July 1999, after the new Half Moon Bay Fire Station was completed, the volunteers got permission and moved the bell from the Mac Dutra Tower, and it's now in front of the firehouse on Main Street. The original bell. And there's the original bell tower from 1900. You can see the bell sitting at the top. And in the base of that, that's where they kept the hose cart that you saw in that first picture from 1901. And my understanding is, I met and sat down with Gil Bustiki, who was the fire chief in Half Moon Bay from, gosh.
80s.
Yeah, the 70s and 80s. He got hired in like 74, but he was the chief in the 80s. And he's still around. And he's still on the Half Moon Bay Lions Club. But he had a wealth of knowledge. But he said that they used to keep that horse-drawn hose cart in the bottom of this building. And if you look on the right, that's a picture from the 1907. We think it was the 4th of July parade. And there's a couple interesting things about this picture. It's very dim, but you can kind of see at the top left corner, you can see the old bell tower. So this is the corner of Main and Kelly, and that empty lot right in the middle left of the picture is where they built City Hall, where the Bank of America was built. Or Bank of Italy, I guess it started out as. The other interesting thing about this picture, and I don't know much about it, but as you can see, they've got the cart before the horse. So the first gag in a parade, I don't know. But
Where's that barn looks like the museum next to the bell tower. Where was that?
So that is visible in the top picture, but this building was on Kelly, pretty much directly across from where the Half Moon Bay Review is now. Yeah. We don't know what happened to that building. First fire drill was held on February 11th. Gosh. 1900 on a Sunday afternoon, well attended. In 1902, they changed the drill night to Thursday night. What time do you guys drill on? What day do you drill on today? Thursday night. They've been drilling on Thursday night for 120 odd years. First recorded fire call the volunteer fire department responded to was a shed fire in 1901, started by children playing with matches. Nothing ever changes. We don't have a picture of that. First motorized fire engine was purchased in 1928, a Seagrave. Seagrave is still in service today. They make excellent fire engines. They're a little more expensive now. What's the latest fire engine that the fire district purchased? Was it about $800,000?
Yeah, 800, a little over 800,000.
Yeah, a little over $800,000.
They bought two of them and they came in July-ish of this year.
Yeah.
Last year, pardon.
When I was operations chief in 2004, we bought a couple of Central States fire engines, and they were only $430,000. So, wow.
We still have one there. There's still one Central States at Station 40.
Yeah, see, I bought a good engine. 1929, they bought a fire siren and alarm box, which were installed on the firehouse. I don't know which firehouse. In 1929, was that the original firehouse on Main Street? Yes. Okay. In 1932, they'd been a volunteer fire department for 33 years. 1932, they decided, oh, this would be a great idea. Let's buy some helmets and fire coats. In March of 1939, a time clock was purchased and installed, which automatically blew the fire siren on top of the firehouse at noon each day. When did they stop blowing the siren?
During Gil Bustiki, Chief Bustici's time.
In the 80s?
In the 80s, and I don't recall offhand.
Somebody complained about it?
It was a complaint. And the reason that the siren was there is because of the farm workers. a lot of them couldn't afford watches, so they didn't know when lunchtime was.
And they needed to test it to make sure it was available if they needed to call you guys to a fire. This clock is still upstairs at the fire station on Main Street. It's sitting up there. I was trying to get them to mount it in the lobby and hook it up to electrical so it would run, because it's in good shape.
Where is the fire station on Main Street?
The very south end of Main Street, right on the corner, right where Highway 1 and Main Street and Higgins Canyon Road come together, that's the fire station.
Right across from the Johnston House.
Yeah, when they were building it, it was, oh, look at this huge building. The people called it the Costco on the coast. Evidently, doesn't stick out that much now. So this is the Half Moon Bay Volunteer Fire Department in 1929 on the 4th of July parade, and that's their brand new engine, right? If you had it now, you'd have to wash and wax it. This is an interesting slide. I'll do a little bit of advertising for the Lions Club. In the 1930s, there was a Lions Club in Half Moon Bay. And in about 1939, the Lions Club disbanded and turned into the Chamber of Commerce because they wanted to do political action to get Highway 92 repaired and paved and all that. And Lions Clubs are not allowed to be politically active. So they said, oh, let's become a Chamber of Commerce. So I don't know if the Chamber of Commerce has that history, but that's the history that we know about. So this was the Half Moon Bay Band, and it was sponsored by the Lions Club until 1939. And I just happened to have access to somebody who had this picture. When the Lions Club disbanded, the band was taken over by the Half Moon Bay Volunteer Fire Department. So I think all they did was change the skin on the drum. But for many years in many parades. In October 1941, the Ladies Auxiliary was formed. And there's some names on here I think that a lot of people may recognize. Marie Angelini, Edna Benson, Elizabeth Bernardo. Edna Benson, that's your mother? Thelma Bernardo. Lily Contini, is that right? Contini? Lida Cunha, Jean Francis, Beverly Gaspar, Pearl Gibbons, Grace Griffith, Mary Lou Miller, Evelyn Nunez, Ann Patridge. You may know of our past mayor, Naomi Patridge. Dorothy Pimentel. I don't know, where's that Pimentel name come from? Is that your mom?
No, we've never really connected the family thing to the Pimentel thing, but they lived here in town for a long period of time, the Pimentel family, that one, and then they moved down to Brisbane Canyon, and they had property out there, and did farming and raised cattle.
We also have Minnie Pence, Mary Quinlan, Helen Radabaugh, Lori Reiki, Yola Reiki. Well, at that time it was Reiki. Yeah, she married a Peaky. I think she married a Peaky and changed one letter of her name. Well, the Peaky has a H in it. Julia Salamoni, is that Salamoni? Your wife's mom. There you go. Hazel Silva and Phyllis Thompson. And this is still in the possession of the Volunteer Fire Department. And the Ladies Auxiliary was in action until 2000?
Yeah, somewhere in that area. We might have made it to like 2002, they might have.
Yeah, when I was hired as a battalion chief on the coast side in 1998, I remember going at least twice to the Ladies Auxiliary Thanksgiving dinner, which was really a great event because one of the things they did is they had an old turkey carcass from the 60s or 70s that had no meat on it, and they'd spray painted it gold. And they had a raffle. You were required to buy raffle tickets. And whoever won the raffle got to take that thing home and bring it back next year. I won it once. Yay! I know what happened to it. Somebody won it and didn't bring it back. During World War II, the department was heavily involved in civil defense, and they put telephones in several of the volunteers' homes so they could call if they wanted to do something on the quiet, I guess. Rosters from the early 40s show an increase in volunteers and members gone to the military. They had a civil defense watch in the fire station every night during the war.
So, okay, what did that involve, the civil defense watch?
I talked to Gil Bustiki, and he said it mostly involved somebody sitting up on the volunteer room in the second floor of the firehouse with a civil defense hat and a flashlight looking for airplanes. I don't know if they ever saw any. So here's an example of a roster from 1941. Chief, assistant chief, captain, lieutenants, names like Bernardo, Betancourt, Salamoni, Patridge again, Griffith. And then right next to it is a roster from 1942. And you see they have supposedly more people, but a lot of those people are suspended or not in the area, either gone for war work or something similar. And you see a lot of them, the assistant chief is now in the Army. Peter Peakey, chief engineer, he's doing defense work. Below that, Army, moved, Navy, Navy, Army, Army. So they had to be pretty flexible with their staffing in those years. We have a lot of journals down at the station with call logs from the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. Lovely stuff. So there was a siren on top of the firehouse. And this was the original sign in the firehouse to remind everybody what these were for. You know, a long alert, take cover, all clear. A pretty integral part of the community. So there's the little old Half Moon Bay Firehouse in 1946. That's it. One bay with a second floor with some volunteer rooms up there. And then where the volunteers meeting, second floor at that time. And the fire truck right in the middle was brand new at this time, built from White. And the buildup was from Van Pelt, over in Oakdale. And that fire truck's still at the firehouse today. The two on the other side are not. This is on Main Street. It's, what was the 600 block of Main Street, right across from Bank of America? Yeah. And the firehouse was there until 99, 2000, when we all moved down to South Main Street. Yeah, we have an interesting picture later on about the Pumpkin Festival in that station. So here's the fire truck.
So you're going to see that in all the parades, or most of the parades anyway.
Yeah. If you go to the crab and salmon feed, they usually park it right in front of the IDS hall. You can look at it and hopefully climb on it and not break anything with your little kids and stuff. In 1946, there was a big brush fire in El Granada that burned for 2 days burned about 700 acres. So we put this in here to remind people that, yeah, it's been raining for the whole week, but guess what? With the right combination of weather, topography, and wind, the coastside has in the past and could in the future have significant fires. So if you're not a CERT member, go to the fire district website and sign up to be a CERT member. You can help protect yourself, your family, and your neighborhood. Oh, and back in 1946, they had a big fire. They needed more staffing. They just went up to the high school and they grabbed all the boys from the high school and they took them down there. Here, take a shovel. Couldn't do that today. There you go. On August 1st, 1947, E.J. Bernardo became the first paid fire chief of Half Moon Bay. So from 1899 to 1947, there were 0 paid staff. And then they had 1 paid personnel, the fire chief, in 1947. He had been the volunteer chief for 11 years. And the reason we have this picture was that in 1947, the members of the volunteer fire department built a history book, and it's still at the fire station. It has wooden binding, wooden front and back cover on it, and it's got a lot of pictures. And if you see any pictures with this red around it, it's from that book. This is the field across from the firehouse on Main Street. A fire that they had in 1949. And you might remember we talked about they got their first helmets and coats and stuff, protective clothing, in 1932, was it? Here's 1949, they're on a grass fire. They're not using any of it. It was a different time. Everybody knows Cunha Elementary School or Cunha Intermediate School? Well, back in 1949, the left half of the building that you see with all the smoke coming out of the scuppers, that was the elementary school. And the high school was the right side down at the end, is what I've been told from Chief Bustiki. And they had a fire in there. So that building has burned in the past, but they were able to stop it and save the building, and that building's still in use today, with some remodeling, of course. In 1950, they got a new fire truck. They kept this for 20 or 30 years. And when they sold it, it went to Lake Almanor. There's a little department up in Lake Almanor that may still have it. We don't know, but nobody knew where it went, but then one of the volunteers was driving by up there through Chester, and there was the fire truck sitting there, and it still said Half Moon Bay on the hood. Nowadays, when they get rid of a fire truck, they take off all that identifier. So the department had a long history of participating in the Shamarita Parade. And they were in full dress with their ties and their hats. And in 1952, in the middle of the parade, they got a fire call. So they all jumped on the rig, and there's a picture of them driving down Main Street in their suits and ties going to a fire. They didn't use their helmets that time either. Does anybody remember before 9/11, 911, the 911 emergency call? In Half Moon Bay, 726-4422 was the call for the emergency call of fire department. And somebody still has this sign. Don't call this number today because it belongs to somebody, right?
It does, belongs to someone, and I've talked to him about us taking that number over just for history, but what will we do with it, what the heck, so he's taking good care of it.
It's history. 1953, they decided they needed another fire truck, so they built one. They had the old 1928 Seagrave. They took the pump off of it, put it on a new chassis, and built the entire truck up themselves. Saved a lot of money doing that. Now it's $800,000.
When are you gonna build a new one?
Yeah. So this used to be the restaurant at the Half Moon Bay Airport. In 1954, it burned down. Damages were $15,000. Nowadays, you burn a room and contents, one bedroom, and it's $15,000 damage. But interestingly enough, you see on the side of that fire truck, they're very proudly folded and neatly hanging coats and helmets. I talked to Chief Bustiki about that. I showed him this picture, and he says, "Well, it was really hard to get them all lined up neat and properly spaced, so we didn't want to use them." So they would have had to spend a half an hour putting them. Yeah. Anyway, different time. This is kind of a neat little article. I'm sorry the quality is not as good as it could be, but this is a 1957 article in the San Francisco Call Bulletin. It's on the volunteers. It has a picture of Chief Bernardo training some of the volunteers in how to operate the pump on the left, and on the right is Phil Salamone, who was the baker at the Half Moon Bay Bakery, right down the road here on Main Street. And it was all about how wonderful the volunteers were protecting the town of Half Moon Bay. It also mentions that they got a radio sometime in 57. They had a radio. Who did they talk to? September 1959, there was a major fire that destroyed the Half Moon Bay Feed and Fuel. So if you look at the picture, that picture looks kind of similar to the current building. Well, the empty lot just on the north side of Half Moon Bay Feed and Fuel, that's where this building was. They didn't save it. This was Gil Bustiki's first fire, who later became the fire chief. He's standing on one of these hose lines. And yes, there's no helmets, there's no coats. And
That guy's got a helmet on.
nope, that's a baseball hat. 1959, house fire, the corner of Main Street in Metzger. They repaired this house and they moved it to the 600 block of Poplar, and it's still there today. I don't know who lives there. Do you? Gil said it was a significant house. Oh yeah, so and so owns that, but I forgot to write it down. But, they were somewhat effective, but I think they'd have been a little more effective with some protective clothing. So here's 1960. So you can see the original firehouse on the left, and then an addition on the right. And they had quite a little selection of apparatus there at that time. And you see right over the door of the firehouse, it says HMBFD. When we moved to the new firehouse on Main Street, that sign was taken off the old building because they sold it, and it was installed in the lobby of the new firehouse. What? It's not there anymore? What happened to it? Miss Board Member? Where is it?
It's in the day room at Station 4.
Oh, it's on the other side? Thank you. Thank you. (1963). We're making progress. Volunteers responded to an airplane fire at the airport. There's at least 2 coats and helmets in there. All right. That looks like an old Piper Cub. You know, when I was working, we had one of those fires. An airplane like a Piper Cub is a steel frame that's covered with doped fabric. And when you light that on fire, it goes woof. And by the time we all got out to the airport, when I was working, we went to one of these, there was nothing left but the steel frame. Fire was out because it had consumed all of the skin. And there was a perfect outline of the airplane on the floor of the hangar of just burnt, dripping stuff. It was pretty interesting. I have a picture of that somewhere. 1964, Half Moon Bay had 2 stations, one in El Granada that the district just moved out of. But in 1964, there were a lot of paid staff and volunteers. Well, there weren't a lot of paid staff. I think there was 1 paid staff at each station. So there was a fire chief, and there was 5 or 6 paid staff and 25 or 30 volunteers. But there's some interesting names here. Gil Bustiki shows up again. He was working there. The chief, Edwin Bernardo. So he was the fire chief in 1949. And here he's still the chief in 1964. Al Sequeira, Carl Mate, Milt Zedler, Gil Bustiki, Don Wright. Mel Mello was a volunteer fire department. Ron Garcia, Don Coates, Buzz Myers was a volunteer at Station 2 in El Granada. Buzz Myers was a director on the board of directors for the Half Moon Bay Fire District for many years, and he's still in town, and he's still around. Doug Nunes, Larry Santoni, Ivo Pacini, how do you say that? Is that how you say his first name? Ilvo. So that's a very historical name around here. A lot of people know or are related.
His wife lived to be 102.
That's 102. Nice. She had the best garden in town.
Oh my God, great. And she worked in it till she was 101.
She had the best garden in town and worked in it till she was 101. That's amazing.
Lauren Newton was the one who got me into the volunteers.
And Lauren Newton was on that page, and he's the one who sucked you into the volunteers. Good job. This picture shows the Half Moon Bay Main Street Firehouse in 1964 or 65. And what's interesting about this picture, Chief Ustiki told me they were all mad because the photographer made him put everything out there and wait like an hour and a half for the shadows to be right. But if you look to the left side of the firehouse, you see that building there, and it says Dutch Boy Paints over the front door. That's the old lumber yard. It was a lumber yard in Half Moon Bay at the time. So this is a picture of Albert's Miramar Hotel. So some of you may have heard of the old Amesport Landing, which was, I guess, a dock that went out into the harbor, and they brought in illicit. I don't know about the illicit alcohol, but they brought materials back and forth. So they built this big fancy hotel there, and in 1967, this is what it looked like before. And in 1967, it burnt down. Caught fire at 4 o'clock in the morning. You win some and you lose some. So this building's entirely gone. It's been replaced with residential houses or something. But it's interesting if you look at the previous picture, the coast had a little bit more frontage and beach back then. Yeah. So Chief Bernardo retired in 1966. He's a volunteer firefighter for 39 years. Was highly respected and was the chief for 11 years as a volunteer chief and 20 some odd years as the paid chief. In the 60s, you can't read these, but 700 evacuated on the coast side. Coast evacuated as wave hits. So there were at least 2 earthquakes that caused tsunamis of some magnitude on the coast. 66, 700 people were evacuated. In 64, it was the Alaska earthquake. So, I mean, today we have tsunami sirens. They go off on, the first Wednesday at 10 a.m.? So if you hear a siren on Wednesday at 10 a.m. in the morning, it's that tsunami siren. And if you don't hear it, thank goodness you're far enough from the coast. So the volunteer fire department added an air horn to the top of the firehouse in addition to the siren. And the reason they had the air horn is they had a coded signal. So the siren would go off and then they would hit the air horn, and the volunteers could tell from the code what part of the coast the incident was on. And so they didn't have to go to the firehouse and look at the chalkboard and see, fire in El Granada. They could just go straight to the fire. Some examples, if it was in Half Moon Bay, it was a 1 followed by 2 digits. So it was a 100 series. Miramar was 200, El Granada was 300, and Princeton was 400. So when you didn't have what we have today, you figured out a way to communicate.
So the district didn't go all the way up to Montero Moss Beach? Yeah.
No, the Half Moon Bay Fire District was Half Moon Bay and El Granada. And there's a map, a lot of the surrounding ranches and stuff, when it incorporated, they added ranches that voted themselves in, and there were a few that didn't vote themselves in. And Point Montero was a separate fire district until 2006, something like that. The Half Moon Bay Fire Department, volunteer fire department, still exists, but the Half Moon Bay Fire Protection District does not. It's now the Coastside Fire Protection District, and it's all contracted out to CAL FIRE. In November of 1967, there was another large brush fire in El Granada. Burned hundreds of acres, 140 personnel, 8 bulldozers, 7 airplanes, fought the fire for 2 days. So a big fire in the 40s in El Granada, big fire in the 60s in El Granada. We haven't had one since. Your fingers crossed. And the trees are bigger.
Chief Biggs was the first chief that was from out of the area. He wasn't part of the community.
Yeah. The Half Moon Bay Fire Chief at the time was named Jimmy Biggs. He was a Redwood City captain or something, and came over here, got promoted to chief, and was chief here for a number of years. When he left, he went to South America and became a fire chief at a big petrochemical plant down there. Supposedly made a lot of money. The fire department had a drill team. I don't know if this was after the band, but they had a drill team that may have been also before the Half Moon Bay Dons. There was a famous drill team called the Half Moon Bay Dons who went all over the place and participated in parades and got all kinds of awards. But this was the Half Moon Bay Fire Department drill team in the Pescadero Chamarita Parade. And if I can make this work. There's the Half Moon Bay Fire Department drill team in the Chamarita Parade in Half Moon Bay. That's Cunha's store in the background, the original one. You didn't see that guy accidentally turn around?
Grinnelli and Cook?
Yeah, so that Grinnelli and Cook, that's now La Piazza?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I believe this is in the 50s, early 60s.
That's before the Crown went to the church. They said they all went and got drunk.
The cars were mid-50s.
So it was probably late 50s, early 60s. Yeah, there's stories about that in the Shamarita parade in those days. They would start the parade and they would all go to church and they'd have an hour-long service. And during that service, some or all of the Half Moon Bay Volunteer Fire Department went to San Benito House. And then when they all came out of the church, they would rejoin the parade and march the rest of the way down the street. And I know of one person who was reportedly pushed down the street in a shopping cart for some reason.
Safety first.
Here's a plane crash in 1967. So one of the very interesting things about the coast that I enjoyed when I came here in 1998 as a battalion chief, the breadth of incidents that happen on the coast. You have airplane crashes, you have vehicle accidents, you have structure fires, we had wildland brush fires, we had surf rescues, drownings, we had cars over Devil's Slide. If you wanted to do a lot of different things, this was a fantastic place to be. I'm not saying that it's enjoyable to go to all those events, but when you're in the fire service and you train your whole life and your whole career to take care of things, when something happens, it's very rewarding to be able to go there and take care of that thing and try to make it the best outcome for those people that were involved as possible. Sometimes it works out really well, sometimes it doesn't. So even back in 1969, we were doing cliff rescue training on the coast. And that was a whole different thing when you're talking about old manila ropes and welded steel litters that probably weighed 100 pounds themselves. Yeah. Here's the Half Moon Bay Volunteers back in, September '68. Skinny ties. Again, there's Chief Jimmy Biggs, who came from Redwood City, was the first out of town chief. And you see a lot of names. Robert Diggs Canyon Road, right up in 92.
The family had well drilling outfit.
Yeah, they were well drillers. Ray Brahe, Jack Pinatas, Melvin Mello, James Morehouse, Tony Morehouse worked for the city of Half Moon Bay for decades. Richard Figueroa, again, Ivo Piscini, Gary Helderly, Edward Nurley, Robert Tucker. Robert Tucker worked for Caltrans on the coast. He was a director for the Half Moon Bay Fire Protection District for many years. Bert Menes, Henry Marsh, Wayne Voigt, September 1968. Those were the volunteers.
Yeah, Wayne still lives up in Lake County.
Lake County. So here's the paid staff in 1968. Not as many as the volunteers, but a substantial increase since 1900. Yeah, Chief Biggs, Dave Betancourt, George Betancourt, Assistant Chief Larry Santoni, who later became chief, right? Captain Al Sequeira, Gil Bustiki in the back row, first one on the left, he became the chief. Dan Riley, Norman Giacotto. Norm was the fire marshal for many years, still lives in town. Walter Schaefer, Gary Kennedy. Gary Kennedy became the fire chief in Point Montera. And Tim Moran, who later became a captain and was a director on the board of directors also. And a lot of people don't know, in 1970, December of 1970, the Half Moon Bay Fire Protection District started an ambulance service. They hired a couple people. They had a gala opening, and it lasted, 2 years?
Yeah, very long.
Yeah, it lasted a couple years, and they couldn't fund it. They couldn't collect money from the insurance companies or the people, and they just, the grant ran out and they had to close it. So for a couple years back in the 70s, we had our own ambulance on the coast.
And there was turmoil about people being laid off and all that kind of stuff as well, so, yeah.
Yeah. In February 1971, this was up on, was this on Higgins Canyon? Yeah, they were going to a fire on Higgins Canyon, and you can kind of see the fire in the background on the top right there. The bridge collapsed. So that's as far as the fire truck got. The rear wheels are in the bridge. So when I was a fire marshal on the coast, you'd always get pushback. Well, why do I have to do that? Well, there's a picture right there. Road and construction standards are very important to a fire district, especially now the engines are so multi-tasked and so big, and they're carrying, 750 gallons now?
Yeah, it depends.
It's a lot of weight.
That one was 800.
That one was 800? Yeah, it's a lot of weight, so the road standards are very important. And this was a picture in the firehouse I thought was just pretty interesting. So this is a vehicle accident. And this vehicle was owned by the Miracle Pie Company. I don't know if you can read that. It says, if it's a good pie, it's a miracle. I don't know that I would buy a pie from this company. So this is how we used to figure out where to get where we were going. We have map books. This is a map book page from 1972. Shows the scale of downtown compared to the current size. Every little red dot was a fire hydrant. So you see some big gaps. Not very many streets. 1971, 72. Seems like not that long ago, but you stop to think about it. 50 years, right, Neil? There's some more cliff rescue training at Redondo Beach. We're having storms right now. Trees are falling. It's not a new thing on the coast. 1973, that poor little Carmanguilla, I think that is. It looks like a cypress tree. In 1975, through the efforts of a number of service clubs and businesses in the community, the fire department was given a $5,000 Jaws of Life hydraulic rescue tool. This was an amazing tool for its time. And cars today are pretty lightly built and have a lot of built-in safety features, crumple zones and such. Back in 1975, your cars that were driving around were from the 50s and the 60s, early 70s. They were tanks. And it was really difficult to get into those cars when they were crumpled up in an accident. So this was an amazing tool that the local businesses and service clubs were able to purchase for the fire district. And so they put it on the back of a pickup and drove it down the Pumpkin Festival parade.
Yes, they did.
On March 14th, 1977, there's a Texaco station now on the corner of 92 and Main Street. It used to be a Shell station. In 1977, it had almost a complete burnout of that station. And Chief Pimentel was on that fire, were you not?
Right, yeah, my first major structure fire.
Your first big fire. What started that fire?
Spontaneous combustion, Chief.
I'm not buying that.
I know that there was another station that was shut down, so they moved all of the products, the inventory and everything into this station to store it at the close of the other one. And all of a sudden it caught fire. So I'm just going to leave it there. And but that's what happened anyway.
There's a lot of water on it.
Yeah.
Now you see in the 90s, here's a training burn, and very gratified to see a lot of protective clothing on these guys. Um, the 80s, 90s is when we really started becoming aware of the issues and the exposure that fire department personnel get. Some of these guys are even wearing breathing apparatus, unheard of for years and years. What was in the 1880s, all the firemen had long beards. Well, that was so they could dip them in the water, get them wet, stuff them in their mouth, and go into the smoke. I've said this before, it was a different time.
This is where the coffee company is.
This is where the Half Moon Bay Coffee Company is now, Stone Pine. So thanks to the volunteers burning all that stuff down, they could build those nice buildings. I don't know, did you draw any of these buildings? Okay, so this picture is only up here because Roger's in it.
Yeah.
I don't know what this is on Miramonte Street in Half Moon Bay.
It's just down the street from Hatch.
Just down the street from Hatch School. It's been repaired now. One of the other fun things that the volunteers have done for many years was participate in fire musters. And they used to have a really big one, and I think they still have it in Columbia, the old ghost town up in the Sierra Nevada. There's a picture of Tony Morehouse and Kevin Frank in May of '93 participating in the, which one was that? Was that the beer barrel?
What they were shooting the water at was actually just a cone. A big, tall, heavy cone, road cone. And there was different events. There's a motorized hose cart type situation.
Yeah, the bucket brigade.
And then, we had a bucket team as well.
This was the end of the hose cart, because you'd run down this parking lot with your hose cart with the hose peeling off, and as soon as the last coupling came off, it would fly through the air, and you'd catch it, screw it on this nozzle, and the other end of the parking lot that would be the start where they're hooking up the fire hydrant. Yeah, so I mean, some of the teams were very finely tuned. Before they even screwed the hose on, they'd have the hydrant start opening and running water down the parking lot. So every once in a while there'd be a little mistake, but it was just wonderful to watch. So this is probably in 1999. This is the last pumpkin festival where the volunteers sold shrimp cocktails right out of the front of the firehouse on Main Street. That was a very interesting couple days back in the late 90s. And those shrimp cocktails were provided by one of the volunteers. Which one was it? Donnie? Yeah, Donnie Pemberton was a volunteer and a commercial fisherman. So they had a connection for the shrimp cocktails. And yeah, this is the old station that was originally built, I don't know, back in the 20s at 635 Main Street. And that's now is it a law office?
It's a law office unoccupied.
Oh, it's empty now?
The chamber just rented part of it.
Oh, great. Well, there's another history connection right there. Summer of 1998. Here's a picture of the new Main Street firehouse being constructed. That had a story in and of itself. When they started building it, they suddenly discovered it turned into a mud hole, and they discovered they had to raise the entire facility, 6 inches?
Might have been a little more than that, Chief.
12 inches? I don't know. They had to raise the entire facility after they started construction. Has nothing to do with the sewer problems we had later on. I don't know if they still have. And here's the old 1946 white Van Pelt. in the Pumpkin Festival Parade in 1999. And guess what? In the 2023 Pumpkin Festival Parade, the same engine was in the parade. Probably the same guy driving it, Mr. Neil Soloway.
Roger.
Neil or Roger, kind of the drivers of the old antique. Here's the act of putting the original 1900 fire bell on the supports at the new fire station in 1999 or so, right? 99? And the proud volunteers. Yep, July 99. So from left to right, in the back, Donnie Pemberton, the fisherman. Kyle Smith, he's a paid guy now in San Mateo.
I originally went across the bay, the firefighter.
Yeah.
Fremont over that way, something. Yeah.
Yeah, for many years, the volunteers have been a little bit of a training ground for paid staff. And, you know, it does kind of make you proud when you consider that there are Half Moon Bay previous firefighters all over the peninsula. And right now they are captains, battalion chiefs, and one is the acting chief of Central County Fire, which is Burlingame, San Mateo.
And the young fellow here at the bottom of the right, his career was at Woodside Fire.
Yeah. So Kyle Smith, and then next to Kyle is Lutz Muslack, longtime volunteer, Muslack, and then some guy named Roger. Tim Chapeloni lived in San Francisco for many years, but had a house in Half Moon Bay, was a longtime volunteer. Down in front on the left is Tony Morehouse. He worked for the city as what was he doing for the city? Just kind of a public works guy. Yeah.
Director of the Public Works.
Yeah, it was great to know him because whenever we had a fire, we needed some barriers or something. We just, hey, Tony. The beauty of a small town. And here's our volunteer, Don Pemberton, operating a line on a structure fire in 2000. This fire was in Moss Beach, directly behind the Chevron station. Yeah, and they tore the whole thing down. They built it back. It looks exactly like it does here right now. Good insurance. In 2003, we actually put on a bucket brigade fireman's muster at the Dream Machines. It was a lot of fun. Went pretty well. Here you see the bucket brigade in action. We almost missed this one. The parade at Nights of Lights for how many years has the Santa been delivered on the fire truck? 40? Yeah, long time. Another tradition in Half Moon Bay.
I've driven.
Yeah, you see Captain Soloway there in the purple jacket is driving. I think that's Charisse McHugh from the Chamber. Used to be the Chamber. Who's Santa?
You know, I don't know. Offhand, I do not.
Half the time we never do.
It's Santa. I think this was 2005. The volunteers did a fill the boot. Made quite a bit of money in donations. Got some feedback, of course, that it wasn't real great to slow down traffic at 92 and Main Street. There's another volunteer, Jason Morehouse. I think he is now a captain in San Mateo. Is he yeah. Yeah, he made captain.
I know it was a paramedic, but he may have made
He
captain.
made captain.
He did?
Yeah.
Right on, yeah.
And this kind of illustrates one of the things that happens on the coast is often if it's a sunny weekend, the traffic is such that if you have a high priority emergency medical response on the coast, sometimes you know that the ambulance is going to take a long time to get to any hospital. And so you call an air ambulance, call Life Flight, they meet you at the airport, and that's what's going on here. You see the Life Flight in the background, and they're bringing the gurney away after putting the patient on the ambulance, on the helicopter. 2008, Half Moon Bay Fire Academy. So these were Half Moon Bay firefighters being hired for the Half Moon Bay Fire Protection District. And out of all those firefighters, 5 of them were volunteers previously. So an excellent training ground in those days. This is a great, I took this picture, so I got to brag about it. I think it's a great picture. This was a boat fire at the harbor, and these are the volunteers helping with extinguishing that with some foam. So with the alcohol and the gasoline that's being pumped into the boats in the harbor, when you get a boat fire like this one was floating around in the harbor. They were able to lasso it and haul it over to the the part where you drive into the water. The boat ramp. Gosh, I've been talking too long. We were able to drag it over to the boat ramp, get it stable, and then put foam on it and get it out. So the Half Moon Bay Volunteer Fire Department, Fire District, had a number of fire chiefs, starting in 1899, Fred Simmons, 1918, Anton Joseph, 1926, Frank Fetter, 1931, Steve Ponce, 1932, Frank Fetter again, Edward Bernardo, 1936 to 1966, Ed Biggs, 1966 to 1969, Larry Santoni, 1969-1981, Gil Bustiki, 1981 to 1993, Ron Delgado, 1993 to 2000, and James Ash from 2000 to 2006. And that was the last full-time fire chief in Half Moon Bay.
Half Moon Bay Fire Protection District.
For the Half Moon Bay Fire Protection District. And after that, it was interims and contractors, and then it was contracted out.
I was actually on the board when we hired Chief Ash.
You were on the board, so that's right. Our volunteer fire chief, Roger Pimentel, was on the board of directors for the Half Moon Bay Fire Protection District, as well as Mr. Hosfeld. So look, we can just blame you guys. So they have their salmon and crab feed, and this is the volunteer fire chief marinating crab. And the first couple ones were had in the firehouse. It was fabulous. Had a really great event. One of the things the volunteer fire department has done for many years is they have a dream of putting a fire museum in place down at the south end of Main Street, using it as a disaster coordination center, training room. Could be a place for CERT to meet. There's how many CERTs are on the coast now? 700?
We have 2,300 members on the roster and 419 certs.
Wow. That's, if you didn't hear that, it was 2,300 on the roster and 419 active certs. Okay, how many certs are in the room? Excellent. Yeah. Consider that, because you'll learn a lot of great information, and you'll get some skills to protect not only your own home, your own family, but your neighbors and your community. CERT is the Community Emergency Response Team. So it's been around a long time. It's basically, in a large disaster, we all know in a large disaster, we're isolated on the coast. You can get in and out on 92. You can get in and out on Highway 1, north and south, if they're open. Devil's Slide seems to close, not so much anymore, but they often would close. We have trees across 92, trees on Christmas Canyon. We have trees on 84. We have, yeah. If you're isolated, you can't get, there's only 3 fire engines on the coast: Half Moon Bay, El Granada, Point Montera. So there's a total of 9 firefighters on staff for the entire coast. And that's what, 30,000 people? So the volunteer fire department that can come in, that live on the coast, can come in and assist. You know, I mean, it's worth their weight in gold. People who are trained and certified are worth their weight in gold. And when the earthquake hits, I'm not going to say if, when the earthquake hits, we're going to all be able to help ourselves if we're CERT trained. And once you've helped yourself, and if you're CERT trained, you're prepared when that earthquake hits. You have food, you have water, you have training, you have equipment, protective clothing. You can take care of yourself. And once you're comfortable with your family situation, your home life situation in a disaster, you can then help your neighbors. Once your neighbors are all set, you can then help your block. You can help your area, El Granada, Half Moon Bay, Pelican Point. So if you're interested, check out the website for the Coastside Fire Protection District. There's still a CERT page on there, and I think you can still sign up for training. It used to be, I think when it was in person, it was 3 days and a Saturday, and now it's most online and a couple Saturdays.
You have your choice. You can do online and then one training day graduation, or you can come to 3 Wednesdays, Saturday, or Sunday. Wednesday, and then the final day is training day and graduation. So 3 classes plus training day and graduation in person.
Yes, it's pretty painless, and you get some really great information. I mean, I remember teaching the fire control part back in 2003 or 2004 or something like that. It's also kind of a lot of fun, and you get to meet people who live on the coast. So everybody's seen this sign. It says Coastside now, but right, this picture shows it Half Moon Bay. Anybody know why that big wall is there? When they built the fire station, the fire chief's office is right here on the corner. And he was nervous that a semi come barreling up Highway 1 would come right into his office. So they built a wall here to stop the semis. I don't know. It's never been used, so that's a good thing. And this is the last crop of new engines, the Pierces that were bought in.
Captain Hosfeld was on board when they.
Yeah, what year was that?
It was, we brought those into the department in 2011. That's my last.
2011. R.E. DeLay was in charge of this project. Yeah. So that was 13 years ago. So guess what? A frontline fire engine is good for about 10 to 12 years. And then you put it in reserve status because these things get road hard and put away wet. You know, they're very heavy. They're up all hours, day and night, racing around up and down the coast.
The engine, come on, honey. There you go. The engine on the left is what the volunteers are running right now. The old engine 40.
So that's the end of the historical portion of the slideshow. So entertain questions, or I can start a couple little slideshows of just incidents on the coast that you can look at while we're asking questions.
We got firefighter McGraw in the back. He joined us after a while. Let's see. Recently finished his apparatus operator classes. He's got some driving time he still has to do, so he's going to be up and running as a apparatus operator soon.
This little slideshow's from. Well, this is from 2003. I think I made this for the first crab and salmon feed. This is a car over Devil's Slide in the middle of the night. My recollection is it went over the Devil's Slide right on the south end of the slide, got about halfway down, hit a little ledge, and caught fire. But the driver and his passenger were sitting on the rocks about 10 feet away from that. Yeah, so they survived. We put them in a Stokes basket and brought them up to the road, and they're coming up to the road. Not the best picture. It was at night. I was busy. The market difference in the protective clothing these days and what you saw what you saw from 1899 to about 1940ish.
When I started in '74, we didn't get issued any new gear. What you got was the hand-me-down stuff from the pig department. And you had a coat and a helmet.
This fire was in 2003. It's right at the tip of Higgins Canyon Road, at the top of the pass. Higgins Canyon Road comes up one side and Prisma Creek Road comes up to the other, and they meet at the top. And there was a guy who owned a piece of property there that had an RV on it. And he was living in the RV. For whatever reason, the RV caught fire, and then it caught the brush on fire, and then it got, more and more acres. CDF at the time came in. We had helicopters, dozers, quite a bit of apparatus to keep that thing under control.
Yeah, it was a pretty large fire, actually. And water was hard to find, so, yeah.
See a hand crew going up the road there. So this was in 2003. So when I was a fire marshal, we'd do public education and fire prevention talks and stuff. And you'd get some of the old time, nothing ever happens around here. Beg to differ. There's Jason Morehouse, an old volunteer who's now a captain in San Mateo. The command post. That was 21 years ago. Seems like it was yesterday.
So we had fixed wing aircraft drop in the fire retardant as well. I don't know if there's any pictures of that, but they were doing that as well as the helicopters with the water.
And there's the RV. Not a lot left. How many volunteer firefighters currently?
Say as of today, probably like 16. We had one good fellow retire here just a couple months ago. He had started a family and stuff, so he was kind of tied up with his family, so he decided he wanted to leave the department, so he left us. But we're at a good solid 16 right now.
Do the volunteers go to all the fires along with the?
There's different incidences we get involved in: fires, wildland, cliff rescue, even like hazmat, anything that takes a lot of personnel, we get involved in all that. Then, so like this time of year, we have rain and water and trees and wires and poles and all that type of stuff. In 2023, we were out for 2 days straight. this time of year, with all of the trees and stuff down. 92 was closed, how many times with trees across? And so we were up there cutting on trees and stuff to get the road open. And so we're here doing whatever we gotta do. You know? It was 6 of us yesterday in 2 different responding vehicles for the rain incident, wind incident that we had yesterday. Again, it was expected to be far more serious than what it ended up being, but we were ready. And we were staffed the better part of the day.
This is just a selection of 2 or 3 minutes of incidents in the last 20 years. Our lovely devil slide. I think this is we landed the helicopter down at Smith Field. I believe that was a motorcyclist who crashed out in the there's an airplane. That's me at the front, Cynthia. We're securing the electrical in the plane. That's a fire in Moss Beach. This was a Y2K fire. The guy had 55-gallon drums of beans and stuff in his garage, and he set one on top of an electrical cord. It compromised the cord, started on fire, and burned up the garage. Yeah. This is a gal they found in the ocean floating right off the tee at the Ritz-Carlton. She lived. That picture was of a gentleman named Dave Cosgrave, who was a captain on the coast and then became a battalion chief, retired, and is now the coastside emergency manager for the county office of emergency management. Little fire at the post office in Moss Beach. I think that was on Gazels Creek Road. This fire was on Higgins Canyon Road. There's a little nursery up there. It's a motorcycle over the side. This was an interesting call. On Highway 92, it was a fuel tender, and one of the loads fell over sideways. So we call in the hazmat, and the owner of the tanker showed up, and they were going to drill into the top and put a stinger in and suck the fuel out. The owner of the tanker said, no, it's only half empty. You can open the side hatch. Yeah, it wasn't half empty. They opened the side hatch. Yeah, the trucking company bought Mr. Cozzolino quite a few Christmas trees down in there. Yeah. Yeah, that's from the muster we had at the Dream Machines. The old Bucket Brigade. We work very closely with Coast Guard when we're doing water rescue type stuff. That's Cunha's.
And for sentimentalists, we have Cunha's doors in the new museum.
Yes.
Yeah. And do they have this sign in the museum?
No.
The one that's charred? I pulled that one out and gave it to Bev.
You did?
Yeah. Every so often you get a boat wash up on the beach. Really very interesting working here on the coast. Just such a diversity of incidents and calls and people and tourists. That's it. That's all we have tonight. So thank you for being here, and we're happy to be here and kind of give you some information that we have. And if anybody has any questions, we'll hang out a while and answer questions. And there's some coats and hats over there if anybody wants to try one on.
I just have to say, on behalf of the entire coast side, thank you for all you do with such great heart.